everyone, my name is Shelby Bowen. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are talking about how to separate your view of God from harmful hyper-charismatic experiences. For those who've been following my channel for a little bit, you might have been wondering where I've been, and I was in my first trimester of pregnancy trying to survive, but we are back, and this topic is one I didn't necessarily see myself digging into deeper, but majority of the clients that I have had coming to me, and if you are interested in what it looks like to walk through coaching and healing from spiritual abuse, I can link my information down below, and you can book a free 15-minute discovery call. But majority of the clients I have coming to me are wanting to talk about these really harmful experiences that they've had in hyper-charismatic churches and how much it has influenced their perception of who God is and how he shows up in their lives. And this is a topic that is really intricate. It is really deep. There is so many different components to it. And so one of the ones that I really want to focus on today is how these verses that are sometimes used in hypercharismatic churches, and honestly, this isn't just a hypercharismatic thing, but how they make us bypass and the verses don't do this, the way that they're taught and told how we should apply them to our lives can make us bypass how we're actually feeling and what we're doing and what is going on in here. What are our emotions? And we feel like, and it is really this big theme that I've noticed in the hyper-charismatic church, that the more you just give off this facade, because it truly is a facade, of look at me and I am this so spiritual, I hear from God, I don't let any situation and circumstance affect me in my life, I have so much faith in the Lord, and it seems really unattainable. And just on a side note, when we see people who come across as if they are these really gifted people, and maybe you've had pastors like this, or you have had guest speakers at your church, and they come in and they tout these experiences that they've had with God and these miracles and all of these things that they've done, and you just feel like, oh my gosh, I am not seeing any of that stuff in my life. And what I'll tell you is, having been behind the scenes and seen so many different high profile, which is like such a gross word to say, ministries, a lot of these people live double lives. And a lot is coming out right now with certain, especially prophetic voices who claimed that they heard from God and had all these talents and would show up on these big stages and prophesy people's emails and phone numbers and all of this crazy information, and you would be stunned. You would be like, oh my gosh, this person must really hear from God. Well, come to find out, some of these people are getting this information off of line. They're having assistants do research about people who are going to be in specific audiences ahead of time, and they are making a show of something that is not really happening. And it is just flabbergasting to me how these people think there will be no recourse for this. What do they think is going to happen on the day that they face God in heaven? That they are alone, they don't have their sidekicks next to them and their ministry buddies, like they are standing face to face alone with God. What is he going to say? What do they think is going to happen? Is their heart so hardened that they really have no idea of how horribly wrong that is and what that day will be like for them when they have to face God? I really don't know. It is mind-blowing to me that people would ever want to chance something like that on fame, money, popularity, all of that. And this, I promise you, will tie back into what we were talking about with the bypassing emotions. So you have these guest speakers come in, and I remember when I was first getting into the hyper-charismatic church, I had this mentor, and he would tell me, him and his wife would tell me all of these crazy stories and things that God did. And I remember one time he was just telling me, like, what are you doing? Like, you're not doing enough. Like, I was in living near college at the time. I was working in local news, and he's like, you need to be on the college campuses and doing all of this stuff, and just making me feel like I was not good enough because I didn't have these wild magical stories that he did. And I remember when I had met my husband, who works in commercial real estate, he's like, oh, you cannot marry somebody who like is not in the ministry. And it's like, I don't want to be in the ministry. I mean, I was at the time, I had been on and off working for ministries. I don't think I actually had worked for a ministry yet. I did go on to work for a ministry after that. With that being said, I just felt like, who are you to sit here and tell me that I'm a lesser than Christian than you? Because I'm not gathering these experiences together to make myself look so awesome. And I'm not finding this husband who's the head of a ministry and doing all of these things. And I just noticed this a lot within the hyper-charismatic church. And maybe this happens in other denominations too, I'm sure, where it's just this facade. It's this show. Look at me. Look at my spiritual giftings. I'm so much, and nobody's saying I'm so much better than you, but it really comes off that way. And I end up talking to a lot of women, and I'm sure men feel this way as well, where you're like, does God not love me? Like, I'm not experiencing the things that these people are. Like, is he not for me? Am I not good enough? And firstly, I want to tell you, if you are feeling that way, no, like, God does love you. And I believe a lot of these people make up these experiences. I'm not saying that God doesn't do miraculous and wonderful things. I do think he does. But I think we have to be really careful to place our expectations on stories people are sharing when we don't know them. Unless you are doing life with people and truly walking with them and trust their integrity and how they live their lives and the things that are happening to them, I would never compare my relationship with God to anybody else's, but I especially wouldn't do it with somebody where I have no idea who you are. You just have a platform on a stage and maybe a big social media following. That's not enough for me. And what it does is it breeds this feeling within ourselves that that's what we are to attain. This, look at me, my faith is, you cannot shake it. I can walk through the valley of the shadow of death and fear nothing. And when hardship comes, we bypass how we're actually feeling in these experiences with this facade. And I want to give you an example of as this starts to unravel, because that's exhausting. And you're going to start to feel burnt out. And you're going to start to feel like a fraud. And you're going to feel like, what even is all of this? And it might feel like everything is unraveling and you don't even know what to believe anymore. And I'm going to give you an example of what this spiritual bypassing looks like. And so I want you to imagine that your name is Carrie and you are at a potluck and your husband recently passed away. And you have this woman from your church and she comes up to you and she says, Carrie, how are you doing? And you're like, I'm really having a hard time. Like I'm really struggling since my husband passed away. And this woman says to you, well, God gives his toughest battles to his strongest warriors, which isn't biblical. It's just this Christian phrase that we use. Or maybe they say an actual verse that's in the Bible, like, well, God works all things together for those who love him. And you're like, thanks. Like, okay, I mean, my husband just died and you want to just sit here and say, well, God's going to work it all together for those who love him. Well, I don't feel any better from hearing that. In fact, it kind of makes me a little mad and a little angry. And then you feel like, well, then am I the problem? Am I a bad Christian because I am upset when I hear that? And I want to tell you the truth is no. And you're not a bad Christian at all. You're being honest with how you're feeling and where you're at. And that's what God is looking for from us. He is God. It is up to him to show us that he works all things together for those who love him. It is not up to us to make that happen in our life, especially when we're dealing with grief or trauma or just really difficult hardships in this life, which we all do. And it's not your job to feel that way and to just stir up this feeling inside of you. No matter how many times you can sit there and rehearse this verse over and over again in your mind, you can't get away from this really deep pain that you're feeling, and you shouldn't have to. And that does not mean, this is really important part, that verse is not true. It does not mean that God doesn't work together good, all things for good for those who love him. It does not mean that verse isn't true. It just means that you aren't feeling that right now, and that is okay. And sometimes we have to come to this place of understanding where we're at right now. I'm really dealing with grief, and I'm really dealing with hardship, and I'm struggling, and I am barely making it through. And while I believe that verse is true, I'm just having a hard time seeing that in my life right now. And, the Bible doesn't tell us that we're supposed to go fix each other. When your sibling or your parent or your child or your coworker or your friend is going through a hard time, of course we want to encourage them in the word and in God, but you're not there to fix them. You're not there to say, well, you need to just be believing that God works all things together for those who love him. Like, that's what it says in the Bible. Like, that's what you need to be putting your hope in. And it's like, I'm trying, but it's just not feeling like that right now. You aren't supposed to go fix people. What the Bible says we are supposed to do is bear one another's burdens. If I was a friend of Carrie, I would think the most loving thing that I could do for her is make her some dinner. And that would last her a couple nights. And bring it over for her. And sit with her. And just hold space for her to cry. And tell me how she's feeling. And then maybe you can say, Carrie, I am so sorry you're going through this. I can't imagine what you must feel like right now. And I am here for whatever you need. I will pray for you. I will hold you when you need someone, you need a shoulder to cry on. I will be and do whatever you need from me in this moment. And oftentimes they're not going to tell you what they need, but you're there. You show up. You make the dinners. You call. You check in. That is bearing one another's burden. That is loving your neighbor. And I guarantee you, as they walk through the experience they're in, they are going to see Jesus in you. They are going to see how God was faithful to bring people around you in that really difficult time of your life. And as you come out the other side, as you start to feel the sunlight on your skin again, as you start to hear the birds chirping and you're kind of awaking to life again, you're going to look back and be like, you know what? God was faithful to me. And, I'm starting to see that maybe he will work this together for my good, And I don't know what that looks like, but I'm feeling like I could see that as a possibility now. Because other people bared your burden, because other people loved you well. And it is not, this Christian life is not about this facade and this show and pretending to be so much holier than thou and so much more gifted than other people. I don't care what you think you can do. Do you love people well? Do you bear one another's burdens? The will of God for your life is not running around showcasing these giftings and doing all of these things, to build a name for yourself. The will of God is that you would know God, that you would love him, that you would love other people. Pure and undefiled religion is this, to take care of orphans and widows in their time of need. This thing is so simple. And yet in the hyper-charismatic church, they make it so complicated. And I know because I used to be a part of it and I am not anymore. But it just, it overcomplicates the most simple thing. This is not supposed to be, oh, I'm going to sit in my prayer closet and pray for 4 hours so that I could see an angel come in and I can have all these experiences so that when I go sit next to Shelly at church, I can tell her I saw that too. Or look at me, I'm going to go sit on this, I'm going to have this crazy experience. I'm going to go tell the pastor. Maybe they'll let me share my story on the stage. It's not about any of that. And what a sad, sad moment when that is what it becomes. And if you feel like, oh my gosh, I feel like that's where I'm at right now, hey, that's okay. I've been there too. And it takes realizing and recognizing and stepping away from these environments to realize, wow, I need a perspective shift and I need a perspective change. And for me, it took going through spiritual abuse to recognize how off I thought this whole thing was. And I'll tell you, being on the other side of it now, there's so much more peace. When my life now, as my life now, and my husband's life now is guided by the word of God, it's not guided by, Joe Schmo's prophetic word for me down the street. I don't bank my life on that. If I'm feeling anxious about the future, I'm not chasing a prophetic word. I am chasing, God, what do you have for me today? Give me today my daily bread. In prayer and petition, I am making my requests known to God. And I am finding peace in the still small moments each day. And that changes everything. It can feel really boring at first. It's almost like if you used to go out and do drugs and party and live life however you wanted, and then you gave your life to Jesus and you stopped doing those things, and the transition felt a little boring. You're like, what am I supposed to be doing now for fun? Like, okay, going to church is supposed to be fun, or like going and hanging out with other Christians and talking about Jesus, that's supposed to be fun. It's like, it takes a minute to adjust to that. And it's kind of the same thing when you come out of the hyper-charismatic church and you are looking into different theology and looking for the truth. You're going to feel like, well, this is a little bit more dull. This is a little bit more boring. I mean, all these, miracles happening. And again, not saying miracles aren't real. God is miraculous. But you're not chasing after all of these things. You're finding the simplicity in the Bible again, and not in these emotionally sometimes driven experiences. And it can feel really boring and really dull at first. But once you can get past that part, you're going to realize how much more peace that you have. And so going back to the spiritual bypassing, which is really the point of this whole video, I want to talk about in the Bible, when Jesus' friend Lazarus died, Jesus grieved his friend. Jesus knew what was going to happen. He knew Lazarus was going to come back, but he still grieved. The shortest verse in the Bible that everybody knows, Jesus wept. He wept. He felt grief that his friend was gone. He felt grief that his other friends were struggling so much that their friend was gone. And he knew that he was about to resurrect him. But Jesus could still empathize with our very human emotions. And in that moment, I think that we can take away that he was trying to teach us something about how to grieve. It is completely natural and normal to be sad when you lose somebody, and to cry, and to struggle. And that is why having and sharing that time with loved ones is so needed. And he was showing us that. To bear one another's burden, to come together in your grief and love each other and be there for each other and cry together, weep together. He wasn't like, oh, you need to sit here. I am Jesus. Don't you know who I am? Like, I'm about to bring this guy back from the dead. You're all sitting here crying. Ridiculous. No, he did not do that. He did not say that. So the next time Karen at your church comes to you saying something like that, you could tell her, no, thank you. I have no interest in hearing that. And you're not the problem because you don't have this. Really, it is a dissociation from your emotions that Karen does. But don't be mad at Karen, because Karen is struggling with her own stuff. Or Betty, or, whatever the person's name is. They just don't understand either. Distance yourself from people like that. It's not going to make you feel better. You'll notice that anxiousness kind of come back up in you again when you're around those kinds of people. And the more that you grow, and we all grow in empathy and in recognizing our own feelings and where we're at and understanding other people's feelings, the more we're going to be able to empathize with one another. And going back to the bearing one another's burdens, I have this written down here, that in Galatians 6:2, it says that is fulfilling the law of Christ, to bear one another's burdens. Like, that just shows you how important this is to God. When your friend is going through a hard time, bear that burden with them. Don't try to fix them. Let God do that. Let God heal them. Bear that burden with them. I guarantee you it's going to show so much more of the love of Jesus than just bringing up all these scriptures and telling them how they need to feel. I saw these examples when I was doing a little bit of research and digging onto this topic to see like what kind of resources were out there online for people. And I found this website in the title, because it's not really about calling anybody out, but I just want to show how this is not done well in the church. And I found this website. This is a biblical counseling website on mental health, depression, and the help that God brings. And the first thing that it says, that when you're struggling with depression, choose a new master, is the first thing it says. When we are feeling controlled by depression, we will often let it be our master and control many aspects of our life. We as Christians must not think this way. We have one Lord, and we cannot be slaves to depression, but there is a way out. We should have the mentality, I am going to serve Jesus however he leads me, no matter what I feel like. Jesus alone is my master. Depression is not my master. Choose to do what Christ commands no matter what you feel like. We as Christians are not to wallow in depression because we must have no other master but Christ. When I read this, I was so taken aback. I'm like, this is a biblical counseling website. And that is what you want to say to people. And I'm not saying that there isn't truth in some of these statements. What we give our attention to, of course, becomes this master in our life. But you cannot tell somebody who is depressed because they are grieving something really difficult in their life that you cannot serve that master. Sorry, you can't. You as Christians, we're not supposed to do that. We can't do that. And I just imagine how many people have been harmed by rhetoric like this. And it really frustrates me that content and counselors and people out there are saying this to people. It really invokes shame that you are just willfully choosing to serve this other master. I don't think that anyone is asking to be depressed. I don't think that anyone is asking for grief. No one, when I was healing from spiritual abuse and I struggled bad, I was having a really hard time. I didn't ask for that. Nowhere did I feel God was saying to me, you're serving that master. You are serving the master of depression, of extreme sadness and anxiety. You are serving that master, and you can't. You either serve that master or you serve me. Never one time did I feel that from God. I felt his gentle, loving kindness and patience as my mind healed and my heart healed and my emotions were processing. I felt his gentle, loving kindness and all of that. And I am so sorry if somebody has ever said that to you, because it really is so unfortunate and harmful. It's worse than unfortunate. It's damaging. And that is not the kind of mentality we need in the church. So I hope this video has helped you identify some of these things and maybe even given you a little bit of peace that if you're struggling right now, it's okay. It doesn't mean we want to stay there forever, but that you have somebody here on the internet who wants to virtually bear your burden with you. And I know that's not the same as doing life and walking with people, and I hope you have them in your life too. But I am here for you guys. Feel free to comment in the comments below any questions that you have, any topics of conversation within the hyper-charismatic church that you want to talk about. I'm going to be working on a Substack article on this topic as well, and I would love it. It would mean a lot to me if you guys subscribe to my Substack. I will link that down below as well. But there's a lot here. There's a lot to unpack. So thank you for taking the time to listen, and I will see you guys hopefully next week.